Paramount Plus is launching right now here in the UK and launches with the first 3 episodes of the Halo TV series. So with these first 3 episodes being available to the wider UK population, I thought it's a good opportunity to go back over the first 3 episodes and discuss what's going on. So in this video and subsequent videos, I will be discussing the new Silver Timeline lore and how it compares to the original lore that I've come to call the Gold Timeline. I will look at where and how the Silver Timeline took inspiration or motivation from the Gold Timeline, how it is similar or how it differs, and in absence of a direct one-to-one lore comparison, I'll speculate on the potential motivations for these decisions. So this is a new lore versus lore series that focuses heavily on the TV series, but references the original Halo lore where appropriate. This is how I think my talents can best be used in support of everything Halo. And just quickly, I know by looking at my channel's demographics that nearly 50% of you are from the US, meaning you've already had access or seen the Halo TV series. But nevertheless, it's debuting here in the UK, so if you fancy going over the details again with me, and while I fill in the gaps in the content that I put out when the TV series first aired, then I look forward to your company. I will cover the first 3 episodes between now and when episode 4 is supposed to air here in the UK, then each subsequent episode in its own video each Wednesday until season 1 is fully aired. Then I will deliver a video on my final thoughts on the entire season 1, with thoughts and speculation on what season 2 might bring. So with that said, let's get on with today's video looking specifically at the lore of episode 1. Now, I'll say at the onset that the Halo TV series happens in a separate canon and narrative timeline that has been dubbed the Silver Timeline. This version of the lore differs fundamentally from the mainline lore of the games and books in ways that set it apart from the established lore, while also allowing the foundations to be laid to extend the narrative of Halo into a multi-season TV series. This is where I believe I can apply myself and deliver content that is relevant to both versions of events, while also giving a better understanding of the universe as a whole, and perhaps adding context where it is lacking. So to kick this off, let's start with the opening. We're introduced to Madrigal, a UNSC outer colony in the year 2552. Madrigal exists in the mainline lore or the Gold Timeline, except it was first discovered by the Covenant in 2528. Thel Vadami, aged 43 at the time and still a relatively low-ranking member of the Covenant, participated in the attacks on Madrigal. Madrigal was a colony made up mostly of insurrectionists, a rebel organisation working against the UNSC and striving for their own independence. The colony was glassed by the Covenant in 2528 and the survivors fled to a nearby asteroid belt. In the Silver Timeline, Madrigal wasn't discovered by the Covenant until the year 2552. It is still mostly populated by insurrectionists, but the planet is also rich in deuterium, making it a valuable mining colony for raw materials used in the UNSC ships and fusion reactors. We're introduced to the insurrectionists and their stories about the Spartans and how inhuman they really are. This is somewhat in line with mainline lore in that the rebels actually told stories and cautionary fairy tales to their children about the dreaded Spartans. This is in reference to Operation Talon, where Spartan 2s were deployed to capture and arrest Colonel Robert Watts. The mission was a success and the United Rebel Front ended up with no leader, causing them to scramble to find a new one. The cautionary tale reads, "Don't be spoiled, don't start a fight, always be careful here at night, because the Spartans might come in suits that weigh half a ton, and they'll steal from you all you got, just like they did from Colonel Watts." So this serves as good world building to outline the fact that the insurrectionists and the rebels are at loggerheads with the UNSC on practically every front. We then meet Quan for the first time, a teenager and daughter of the general of Madrigal's insurrectionist army. She is not known to exist in mainline lore whatsoever, nor her father, so Quan and her story is entirely rooted in the Halo TV series. Her story serves as one of the primary world-building human elements of this new timeline for the first half of the series. and even on that point I found it very difficult to engage with and care for her as a character, and what world building there was that surrounded her actual story and motivation is lackluster at best. Nevertheless, she makes a discovery of the Covenant Phantom on Madrigal and goes to warn her friends and the Outpost of their presence. Before she can, the Covenant attack her friends. Be prepared for some pretty gnarly and gory scenes here. From a physics standpoint, the effects of the Covenant's plasma weapons on an unarmoured human body is actually relatively accurate. This was established in the books and conforms to accepted science, but for the sakes of gameplay this is dialed down significantly, otherwise the game just wouldn't be fun to play. Plasma is a superheated gas, and without immense pressures, gas can only be heated and phase change into plasma around 10,000 degrees. Although it is worth noting some materials have lower ionization temperatures around 3000 Kelvin, but even at these temperatures, if the body comes into contact with it, the water in the cells flash vaporizes. This nearly instant change from liquid to gas causes an explosive expansion in volume, effectively blowing limbs clean off of the body. And that is most definitely what we observe in the TV series. The Covenant elites very quickly overwhelm the Outpost, tear through the insurrectionists quite literally, and the use of modern day weapons and vehicles in a time 500 years in the future was an odd choice, to say the least, and the elite tipping over the truck doesn't look right based on the angle of impact and the way that it rolled, but I digress. After a short and bloody battle, including the general witnessing an elite gun down the women and children while they hid, Silver Team arrive. Master Chief enters the battlefield and the general immediately prepares to fight the Spartans as well. Chief remains focused on the Covenant elites, completely ignoring the general's bullets striking his armour, and takes on the elite. The two share a moment of understanding where the general realises the Spartans are here to take on the Covenant, not to kill the insurrectionists. This is known to have happened in mainline lore on numerous occasions, with Spartans and the UNSC at large fighting alongside insurrectionists against the Covenant, a common enemy. The adage, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," is the takeaway message to this circumstance. The Spartans rapidly take control of the battlefield and kill the Covenant, but not before they kill every insurrectionist in the Outpost, save for Quan. Silver Team move on and perform an area sweep, soon coming to a cave that Quan first saw the Covenant ship over. Inside, Chief discovers a foreigner artifact, and upon touching it, it activates and Chief sees fragmented memories of his childhood. This is similar to what we see in the scanned trailer from Halo 4, where the Didact scans the Chief and accesses his deep memory. Chief touching a foreigner artifact and it activating is also relatively in line with both the old and new lore in the Gold timeline. Back in the Bungie days, all of humanity were Reclaimers. Humanity were the heirs to the Foreigner Empire, and as such their technology only worked for us. Once 343 took over, they made it so that only humans who possessed a gene song, a form of genetic engineering performed on select groups of humans, specifically from the Librarians' special group, were Reclaimers and able to activate foreigner artifacts. The Silver timeline has taken this a step further and made Reclaimers even more rare, with an approximate prevalence of 1 in 1 billion, if a later quote is to be taken at face value. We next find ourselves on Reach, being introduced to Dr. Catherine Halsey, creator of Mjolnir and the Spartan program, and civilian contractor to the UNSC, and Admiral Margaret Parangoski, Commander-in-Chief of the Office of Naval Intelligence. Their relationship is complicated, and they are often at odds with one another, and it is obvious from the exchange of dialogue that there are various factors surrounding Halsey and her work that both Parangoski, Oni, and the UNSC do not approve of, foreshadowing the incarnation of Halsey following a similar path to the war criminal Halsey she has been painted to be in recent times, versus the morally grey, conflicted and complex but otherwise well-intended Halsey from the earlier books. Next we are introduced to High Charity, the Covenant Holy City, the Prophets and the Blessed One. High Charity differs substantially in appearance to the high charity in the games, but still has the Forerunner keyship, the Anodyne Spirit, at its core. The prophets look fantastically accurate to their lore portrayal, and Mercy converses with a human who has been raised by the Covenant as a Blessed One, the Covenant's name for a Reclaimer. This is interesting because the Covenant and the prophets in the main canon, in the Gold timeline, view humanity as vermin to be exterminated, an affront to their gods. And yet this Blessed One has been living amongst them all of this time. The prophets wouldn't do this unless they had something to gain in the mainline lore. One can only assume, since the Covenant have issues activating Forerunner artifacts in both the main canon and the Silver timeline, having their very own Reclaimer who will diligently help them achieve their goals seems like a logical course of action. Next we find Quan waking up on Chief's Condor while he sits and muses over the artifact he collected. A discussion begins between Quan and Miranda Keyes. Miranda in main canon and the Silver timeline is the daughter of Captain Keyes and Catherine Halsey, and since she is estranged from her mother, grew up with her father and joined the UNSC. Where things differ is that in the Gold timeline, she eventually gains control and command of her own ship in the UNSC Navy. In the Silver timeline, she became a UNSC scientist and specialised in xenobiology and xenotechnological reverse engineering, in direct competition to her mother. The conversation doesn't go well as Quan continues to grieve the loss of her father and the people at her outpost. Chief gives Halsey a very brief debrief via an uplink and confides in her about the memories or vision he had while in contact with the artifact. She remains dismissive and assures him they'll look into it when he returns to Reach. This is obviously of concern to Halsey, as part of the process of indoctrination that the Spartans underwent during training involved suppressing memories of their lives before their kidnapping at the age of 6. Through a complex amalgam of training, education, exhaustion, mental conditioning, distraction, punishment, and information denial, the Spartans very quickly forgot their lives before their service. So for Chief to be remembering things would come as an alarm to both the main canon and Silver timeline Halsey, if for different reasons that we will get into later. We are introduced to Captain Jacob Keyes. Again, he differs from his canon character in that he doesn't captain a UNSC ship, and instead seems more involved in the sciences, command, and Office of Naval Intelligence than with the combat arm of the Navy. He also demonstrates a departure from his game and book characterization, whereby he is more willing than his main canon counterpart to sacrifice innocence and blindly follow orders. This, I believe, was a mistake. Back with Quan and Chief, some dialogue fleshing out some aspects of the universe is discussed, including a story surrounding a meeting of insurrectionists while Silver Team were deployed to take out the leader. During this conversation, even Chief acknowledges, by finishing Quan's sentence, that he had doubts about the motives behind why it was necessary that the mission objective changed halfway through from taking out the leader to taking out all of the insurrectionists. Though, following this, you hear his tone stiffen as his indoctrination kicks back in, and he defaults to assuming it was for a reason that just wasn't immediately clear to him, and that he should just trust and follow his orders. Quan challenges this, but nevertheless the brief break in his cold visage demonstrates that the considerate, protective, innately attuned Chief is in there somewhere. And the order to eliminate Quan and Chief's decision to ignore this order again reinforces that he isn't just a machine and already has his own perspective on what action is and is not necessary. His following actions drives this point home further as he begins taking action to avoid having to enforce the kill order. His intention was likely to avoid landing at Reach altogether and take Quan elsewhere and perhaps set her free. Unfortunately, Halsey, Parangoski and the UNSC has other plans. They reduce the relative oxygen in the Condor's atmosphere, putting Quan into a state of hypoxia. Then they do the same to Chief's suit. Despite only breathing on 40% normal oxygen, Chief maintains his consciousness and overwrites the oxygen deficit. This broadcasts to Chief clearly that the UNSC are now equally willing to betray him should they deem it necessary. This sows the seeds for Chief going against orders as he did, or at least similarly to how he did, in Halo 5. Now in Halo 5 it was because he took it upon himself to stop Cortana and thus save more colonies from being destroyed by the Guardians. We learn in Halo Infinite that he blames himself for a lot of that, that had he have actually taken action sooner in stopping Cortana, all of those lives wouldn't have been lost. In the Silver timeline, it's because his memories of his childhood and his doubts surrounding the validity or necessity of his orders are motivating him to take action. And although he is unaware of it, at this point in the narrative, a motivating factor behind his decision to save Quan is related to a revelation made in a latter episode, and how Quan's survival is something of a necessity if he is to eventually locate and secure the Halo from the Covenant. I'm making a short video on this subject specifically in due course to cover this, but I wanted to keep this video relatively surface level, so look out for that if you want to know my reasoning. Onwards from this, it becomes apparent to Command that Chief is no longer following orders. Chief attempts to talk to Quan to ask her for help to take control of the ship, but is interrupted by Quan holding a battle rifle. Knowing in advance he can only achieve this task with her help, Chief removes his helmet as a display of trust to Quan. In this moment, Chief understands she is on edge. She's just lost her father and everyone she knew mere hours ago. She is also still likely in shock, being a teenager and thus likely never actually having seen combat, never encountering an alien species before, and then having her childhood friends quite literally blown apart in front of her eyes. One gets shot in the face and their head disappears. This is the kind of level of trauma that she's just experienced, and this was simply by the elite's plasma weapons. And on top of all of this, she has had a hit placed on her and she's holding a rifle. This is a very uncomfortable situation that the Chief is fully aware of. Chief acknowledges all of this and confirms to Quan that he is wearing Mjolnir Mark 6 and that its outer shell is an enhanced titanium, so the bullets that she may fire wouldn't do anything to him. But he is also completely aware that without her assistance, the Condor will be grounded, Quan, an innocent child, will be removed and executed, and Chief will likely be court-martialed, and he will then likely not be able to ever find out the truth behind his memory recollection and his ultimate purpose. Quan's question, "So you just decided to help me? Why would a Spartan do that?" and Chief acknowledging it that he doesn't know, because it's related to something about himself that he has yet to uncover, and you can see in his expression that that unsettles him. This display of trust has its desired effect, and the tenuous alliance that follows is positively reinforced by the fact that without being able to disengage the AI autopilot failsafe controlling the ship, and disconnecting the stabilizing servos at the same time, they'll lose complete control of the ship and fall from the sky at what looks to be transonic speeds, of course until they begin their final approach to High Command. Chief's expert knowledge of UNSC military equipment being demonstrated here, and his strategic planning in being able to realise this potential problem arising, and being able to preempt it and gain Quan's trust to secure the only viable way out of this situation they find themselves in. If Quan's trust could be gained by simply removing the helmet and making himself vulnerable but showing faith and trust in Quan was all that was needed to convince her, Chief made a very logical decision in removing his helmet. The Condor finally comes to a hover, but the ship is hit with an EMP, knocking out its electronics, causing it to drop the remaining distance onto its belly. Chief moves to the artifact, relives some of the more fractured memories, and the artifact reaches out to the ship and reboots its systems while shutting down command systems at the same time. The artifact appearing to be operating to protect the Reclaimer accessing it. Chief pilots the Condor away from Reach and out into space. And that rounds out episode 1. What do you think about how things tally up between the silver and gold timelines for the lore in episode 1? Did you like this format of video? Do you think the reasoning behind some of the decisions when explained the way I have here makes sense at all? And if not, why? I hope to see you on the next Gold versus Silver. Thanks for watching, commenting, liking and subscribing. I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members: Spartan10148, my Metarch, Dylan, Falcon X003, Kenwood, Irrefutable Justice, Leon, Neek and Ramiz, my monitors, Alvin, Andrew, Brand, Brian, Cameron, Chris, Darian, Devon, Flaming Halo, Greenblood, Kyle, Legions Lost, Michael, Prophet Bear, Spartan and Wolf, my sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my diligent enforcers, and all the other awesome people that have jumped aboard to support the channel over at Patreon. Another shout out to Todd Morrison, my Transcendent YouTube member, and just one quick reminder to support us on all major social media channels including Discord. Much love from 00. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.